Over the Bills 13-7 on Sunday, and of course headed out to Cleveland this week. I'll be on the scene in Cleveland as well as Luke Jones, following all things Owings Mills all week long, but every day we're in this baseball pennant race. We don't even know how to act around here. The Orioles at Fenway Park, and of course coming home to Camden Yards, and I'm writing a couple of blogs about attendance issues with the Orioles this week. You'll want to check that out at WNST.net. This guy has been attending games all around the East and the West Coast as one of the lead writers for MLB.com. I used to read him when I was a kid, but don't tell him that. It only dates him. But he's cool. He loves Bruce Springsteen. He is Boomski out on Twitter and at MLB.com. He is Barry Bloom, one of our defending champions. Where haven't you been the last couple weeks? You're all into this American League 10-team race for these 5 spots, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've either been at Yankee Stadium. I was in Phoenix this weekend for Giants, to see the Giants. And then, as you said, sprinkling in a few Springsteen concerts in the East Coast among the baseball tapes.
You got to do it, man. You got to, and it's weird, though, Springsteen in a baseball stadium. So I saw Pearl Jam 2 weeks ago out in Chicago in Wrigley, and I just saw, Springsteen for 2 nights in Philly. I think it's really weird that these baseball stadiums have become places. I mean, and it rips up the field, right? I mean, in every case, it destroys the outfield.
Well, in the case of the Phillies, does it really matter?
Well, it depends who's playing there next week, right?
I guess. Well, yeah, I know the Mets are. The Mets come in. I think they finished the season there, so it's. I think they do a pretty good job at rehabilitating the fields. I mean, if you can rehabilitate Yankee Stadium in between soccer games, you can rehabilitate after a Springsteen concert.
The Yankees are, for me, one of the really great stories here since the trading deadline, and I know you've on and off covered the Yankees for the better part of 4 decades now. Some thoughts about this latest incarnation of all the unlikely things that they are going to play a major role in this pennant race, if not be involved in it themselves?
Well, I mean, I think that, if you go back to the trade deadline, they played a 3-game series down in Tampa and were swept. Alex Rodriguez played the Sunday game, struck out 4 times, and that effectively ended his career. They made a decision at the trade deadline to just dump and start bringing up new people. I think they finally got to the point where, this was all done in Tampa in front of Hal Steinbrenner and the Yankee hierarchy. They just got sick of watching it. The Yankees were kind of mired in being a 500 team, and they couldn't get over the hump. And keep in mind, they were open the season 8-16. They didn't have Chapman for the first month of the season because of the suspension, and I think the opening of the season would have been a lot better had they had Chapman. Because I could pick 2 or 3 or 4 games. I was on them a lot in April that they could have won if they had the deeper bullpen.
And they look like a bad baseball team then, right? I mean, April and May, they look like there was a very little chance they'd finish at 500 even with all those players, right?
Well, I mean, there's certainly historical precedents to deny that fact. The fact is that when they opened in '84 at 8-16, they wound up winning 87 games with a fairly mediocre team, which really didn't get them anywhere because there was no wild card back then in 1984. You look at it and you go, and I think this is what they did. They kind of fooled themselves into saying that with the same group of guys, they were going to continue to move forward. And even though each of these guys were older and becoming more infirm, they were still under the impression, for the first couple of months of the season that things were going to turn around. And it did with some of them. I mean, Headley had a terrible month of April. He since has had a pretty good rest of the season. Beltran obviously carried them the first couple of months. They were running him into the ground, with the fact that they had to play him in right field and DH A-Rod. I mean, really, it came to the point where, A-Rod was starting to come around a little bit at the end of April. He hit 3 home runs in 4 games between Fenway and Texas. Then he was running out of ground ball in Baltimore and blew out his hamstring, and he missed 21 days, and he could never get it back after that. But the point of the matter is, with A-Rod out of the lineup and Beltran as the DH and Hicks out in right field, they were a much better team, and they started winning. So now you look at the whole thing. They had to dig their way out of the hole, and by the All-Star break, they were at at 500, win or lose a couple of games. They could never get over the hump of being more than like 2 or 3 games over 500. And when you look at it, you say Beltran is going to be a free agent. Texer is a free agent. Chapman is a free agent. What are you doing here? Are you going to basically, tread water for the rest of the season and then start over in spring training, or are you going to do it now? And I think they elected to do it now. And unbeknownst to them, getting A-Rod the hell out of there was a good thing, because actually he was very well liked by his teammates, and his struggles were not going unnoticed. And the fact that they were diminishing his playing time, and he was in the locker room every day, alternately bemoaning it and not, was having a deleterious effect on the club. But that 2-week period from all the trades at the trade deadline, Teixeira's announcement that he was going to retire at the end of the year, which I think he did that to head off being released or traded, and then A-Rod's unconditional release, were probably the most chaotic 2 weeks I've ever spent around the Yankees. And that's with the old Steinbrenner and all the other stuff that's gone over the course of the years. This harkened back to like 1978 when they fired Billy Martin and then brought him back on Old Timers Day and said he was going to be the manager again next year.
Bronx Zoo days is what, as you would say, right?
Yeah, this was like as nutty as you could have it. But nobody would have ever projected the fact that you bring up Sanchez and he hits 15 home runs. You bring up Judge and Austin, even though Judge is kind of flatlined since he came up with 2 home runs. He's played a decent outfield. He's getting some experience. Austin went through his travails, but he won a game last week, against the Rays. Their pitching is patched together. Tanaka, I read about it last week, is quietly having a terrific year because he's finally adjusted to the fact that he doesn't have his hard stuff anymore and doesn't have the repertoire that he came over with from Japan. But he's a smart enough pitcher that he's adjusted that if he spots the ball and keeps it down in the strike zone, he can be very effective. And that's what he's doing now with that not a whole lot of velocity. Well, and they have 12 no decisions with that guy, and they've won like 22 out of the 29 games he's pitched. So, he could have a much better record right now than he actually does. But still, I think with 14 wins, he's been terrific. And then, like, Luis Cessa has come up and pitched very well. Mitchell came up last week after the season coming back from an injury, the injured toe. He's pitching very well. And Girardi is as good working a bullpen in the American League as Bochy is doing in the National League. He's gotten the most out of it, and it's been a great run.
Well, they're going to play a huge role in all of this over the next couple of weeks. Once they get done with the Dodgers by the weekend, it's the Red Sox, and I know you're going to be in Boston with Springsteen as well as the Yankees and Red Sox. The Orioles are going to be there during the course of the week. Then it's, Toronto and Boston, and then the Orioles at the end. If you're an Oriole fan and you're hoping that Boston or Toronto somehow lose some games, they're going to be losing them to the Yankees probably, right? If they're going to lose games. This is the beauty of the way this thing is constructed. Now, the Orioles play Arizona weirdly the last week of the season, and I know Tampa Bay sprinkled in here, but these 4 teams that we're in for the last 3 weeks could be as big a dogfight as we have ever seen in any pennant race in the history of our lives, really, because this could come down to the last weekend where all 4 teams are a game apart.
Well, you have, it's parallel in the NL East and the NL West and the wild cards in both leagues at this point, because the Yankees have, as you illustrated, because they're all playing each other. Once the Yankees get through with the Dodgers, they have a series down in Tampa, but the rest of the season they still have 7 games against the Red Sox, and then a series each in Toronto, and 1 at home against Baltimore. So they've got their own, fate in their own hands. And if they do well against these teams, which for my money are the top 3 teams in the American League, then they deserve to be in the playoffs. It's as simple as that. And even Buck, when I saw Showalter in New York, when the Orioles were there and lost 2 out of 3 a couple of weeks ago, Buck said that of all the teams in the league right now, the team he probably least wants to play is the Yankees, because the Yankees are just, they're not on fumes. There's no expectations at this point. They're relaxed, and anything they're doing is beyond anybody's expectations, which for the Yankees is just unbelievable, because there are always major expectations with them. But when they cashed it all in at the trade deadline, and then A-Rod was jettisoned, everybody figured the season was over with, and that's when they relaxed and started playing. So, I mean, yeah, the Yankees could do it, and it's the same thing with the Giants and Dodgers in the West. The Giants have 6 games left against the Dodgers, 3 in L.A., 3 to finish the season in San Francisco. They've got a 4-game home series against the Cardinals this weekend that if they control that home series, they lock up a wild card spot, because they'll eliminate the Cardinals, and then it'll be them and the Mets. And then for whoever gets home field advantage, and, I'm sure you've looked at the Mets schedule. I mean, they've got, once they get through Washington this week, they've got no 500 teams the rest of the year. It's Atlanta, Philly, and Miami for the rest of the year for them.
Well, we just saw Detroit here, and it's the same thing for them. I mean, Detroit has 7 games with Minnesota and 3 with Atlanta the rest of the way. I mean, the worst of the worst teams. So you look and say, well, who are the other teams coming to get you in the American League East or in the West? Obviously, in the West, there's 3 teams and there's 2 spots. But in the American League, it's insane. I mean, Houston and Seattle are still banging around. Detroit and Kansas City still a factor in this thing, not to mention these 4 teams in the East. I think that's why the next couple of weeks of baseball, I mean, the amount of scoreboard watching and the amount of games.
This is why, the extra wild card makes a big difference in all this. This is why I'm in favor of 2 more wild cards, 1 in each division, and then, and do like a 2 out of 3 first round, shorten the season, start it a little earlier. Everybody's involved. There's no buys in the first round anymore. If you win the division, you get home field advantage. That's it. And then you have to survive your 2 out of 3 round to get to the major next round of the playoffs. Because the more teams that you have involved, the more interest there is in this. Hockey and basketball figured this out a long time ago. The NFL got on board. Now baseball has it, but they still have only 10 of 30 teams getting into the playoffs. If you added a couple more, it would not hinder what's going on in baseball. Just give more interest in September when the NFL season is starting and hockey camps and basketball camps are starting to rev up. The more interest you can generate, the better, and that's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the Mets are 8 games out. If there were no wild cards, there would be no interest, and the season would be over. The Cubs are 14 and a half games over the Cardinals, and the Cardinals are still involved in a wild card race. That season would be over. So, I mean, the more the merrier as far as I'm concerned. And I just think, it's going to be a very exciting last 3 weeks of the season. And with the last weekend matchups, it could come down to the very end. I mean, it's Orioles at Yankee Stadium in the last 3 days of the season. And I think Toronto at Boston.
Barry Bloom joining us here. He is the longtime MLB.com columnist and reporter for many, many years. East Coast and West Coast, getting all around the country and watching some baseball. Barry, I got to ask you, I mean, the Orioles are coming home this weekend, and I was in Germany with my wife the last homestand when no one was showing up to see the first place Blue Jays play. Tampa's coming in this weekend. I know they're giving away some bobbleheads, and they have a huge calendar event next week with the Red Sox as well in the middle of the week, where generally it doesn't draw well. Baseball's attendance issues are not just limited to Camden Yards and Peter Angelos and the breakup of the Baltimore-Washington and the division of the Nationals and Masson and all the money that Angelos has grabbed out of that. But, there really is a pragmatic point of, hey, we're in a pennant race. These games matter. If you care, tickets are $15. You'll come out to the ballpark. If you've got something else to do, you won't come. Or maybe you just like watching the games on TV. But Baltimore, Cleveland, a couple of places where there's been real success on the field, and at this particular time, folks aren't coming out and buying tickets, and Baltimore certainly is one of those places right now.
Here's my take on what's going on with Baltimore, and having been there, quite a bit since last September, and I've had discussions with Dan Duquette on this. Basically, the problem with Baltimore is that where the ballpark was located was a great place 30 years ago. Same thing in Cleveland. In Cleveland, they really, I haven't been there in a while, but they've never built around that arena and that stadium in Cleveland. There was no urban renewal around that.
Sure.
Usually in the big cities like San Francisco, San Diego, Colorado, and Denver. I mean, around the arena in Tampa, there's been huge urban renewal, either done by private concerns or done by the cities, or in a conglomeration with each other, which have built up those areas and turned them into destination places for you to go. Camden Yards is not a destination place for you to go. On one side of it, you have the harbor, which is still beautiful. On the other side of it, you have a low-income area with people who can't afford to pay even $15 to go to the ball games at Camden Yards. And now you've got a situation where people in the outer areas don't want to come down to the inner city, and they don't want to go to the ball games there. It's a bad location now for that ballpark, even though it's still a beautiful ballpark and a great place to watch the game. It's one of those areas where it needs to be out, much like what's happening in Atlanta, where they finally decided inner city and that neighborhood where Fulton County Stadium and Turner Field has been all these years, it's just not the right place. Nobody's coming down from Marietta or any of the counties, Cobb County. They're not coming downtown to watch baseball games, so we have to move out there. And essentially, that's what the Orioles are going to have to look at. It has nothing to do with Masson, has nothing to do with distribution of money. They've got an excellent team. I was there 2-3 weeks ago for a series against the Red Sox in the middle of the week. They drew 26,000 for the 2 games. I was there for Yankees. They had like 18,000 people early in the year. Okay, it was cold, school, weather. I mean, there was rain. Still, it's like there's a demographic problem there that at some point in the next decade they're going to have to address.
Man, that's a very controversial thing you're saying, and I'll be honest with you, Barry. That's outside the box. The Camden Yards isn't good enough or isn't the right place when they were drawing 3.6 million people here 20 years ago. I'm putting together a double-sided blog, and I'm going. I'm taking a deep dive into this. Obviously, Angelos took my press pass 10 years ago when I did the Free the Birds walkout, which is the 10th anniversary of that 10 days from now. And one of the things that I pointed out then when they were in their 9th losing year, which would become 14 losing years and 5 straight last-place finishes after the walkout. Part of the issue was people are going to stop caring. They're going to stop being Orioles fans to the point that you want them and need them to be. I've done sports radio for 25 years, Barry. They're a brand now that doesn't appeal to new people. People who used to be Oriole fans, still Oriole fans. They come less, sure. They live further away, the riots, all that other stuff that's going on, the amount of money. Angelos was insane this offseason. He didn't send season ticket renewals out until February. It's unprecedented in the history of North American sports. So they lost a lot of their season ticket base. But reason number one is obviously they put a baseball team 38 miles away that draws 30,000 of its own people. They've done nothing but win there. There's been not a lot of sour grapes there other than losses in October because they didn't have a history of last place and chasing off legends and all of the nonsense that Angelos did during the Davey Johnson era and all of the baggage that comes with Mike Flanagan's suicide, all the stuff that I've witnessed here for 25 years. But the biggest thing is they really did divide the market, and Angelos screamed about this for years. If we put 2 teams there, neither one will be sold out. That was sort of his thought, and that's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy at this point because they're not here. And Barry, I don't know that they're coming. I mean, at this point, an Oriole fan would say, well, I'm saving money for the playoffs. I mean, the playoff tickets are expensive,
Right. Well, all of that is contributing factors, and, the reality of the situation is, you've got a mega market there with enough of a fan base that just like the San Francisco Bay Area where the 2 teams are like 10 miles apart, just like, New York where the 2 teams are 5 miles apart, 38 miles shouldn't make that much of a difference. And the rivalry that you build between the Orioles and Nationals should be an enhancement factor. And certainly, I go to the games. I was down at a couple of games that the Nationals played against the Orioles down in Washington, a week or 2 ago, and the place was sold out, and half of it was Oriole fans. So they're coming. They'd probably rather go from, Maryland south of Baltimore down to Washington to see a game than come up to Camden Yards at this point. So there's a systemic problem there. You have fans and you have people going to the ballpark, and the games in Washington were sold out. So, I mean, and there's a huge fan base, and Scherzer even complained about it the night he pitched. He pitched in the eighth inning, and he said he threw himself out in the eighth inning because he was hearing the Oriole fans in there, cheering for their team in our ballpark, and he got upset about it. So, I mean, there are Oriole fans, there are young Oriole fans. It's just a matter of how you do think out of the box and say, okay, we need a different look at this than what we've been doing. And all these things that you mentioned that happened in the past, at some point they become irrelevant because in this era, with Duquette and Showalter teaming up together, as strange as their relationship might be, they make it work. And Duquette has done a really good job piecing together with a limited amount of funds a really good and entertaining team to watch. And, just like he did in Boston, when Theo got all the credit after he was fired, and they won the World Series with Theo with his team.
Well, there was a theory here for a long time. When we win, you'll all come back. You will, because we're the Orioles. And they are winning, and they are a good team, and there's a lot of reasons to go, right?
But what I'm saying to you is that having been there since the first year that the Orioles opened up that ballpark, there are lifetime and lifelines and demographics of areas change. And while it was a growth thing for the Inner Harbor to put Camden Yards there in 1992, the demographics now have changed irrevocably in downtown Baltimore, and you have to make some adjustments and think out of the box and figure out how you're going to do it, or else you're just going to be stuck in this malaise for a long time where, the winning baseball is only a component part. It's not, okay, well, if we have winning baseball team, people are going to come back. Obviously, it's not true because they've had winning baseball teams, and they're a fun team to go watch.
Barry Bloom covers all things baseball for MLB.com. Let's get on to the field with the Orioles here. I mean, you must have some assessment. I mean, I'm sure you, much like all of us, were predicting that Ubaldo Jimenez was going to be their best starter in September, right?
Yeah, well, I think that, I'm amazed that they are where they are with their starting pitching. With having lost Tillman for a good period of time there with the shoulder injury. Gosman also stepped up and, he pitched 2 terrific games against the Yankees during that period. Baldo is a professional pitcher, and I saw him down against Matt Scherzer, pitch for pitch pretty much for 6 innings down in Washington. And they wound up losing that game because Scherzer just pitched a little bit better. The Orioles couldn't hit Scherzer, but I mean, otherwise their starting pitching. I've written about it a number of times. It's practically the worst in baseball. They've got a bullpen which is terrific, and Buck has used it well to spot the starters. Their starters don't even average 6 innings a game, so it means you have to go into the bullpen, very early, and get to Britton, who's turned out to be the best reliever right now in the best closer in the American League. So I mean, they're just getting a lot out of it. But, here's the thing. When you look, whether they win, the wild card, win the division, the teams that are best set up to win for the long run are the teams that have deep starting pitching. Once they will survive, and they might even win a wild card game having to use Tillman or Gosman or whoever. But once you get to the next series, they're not going to have 4 credible starters to throw up against another team that might. I mean, so you have, Texas with a pretty deep pitching staff. You have Cleveland with a very deep starting staff. In the National League, the Giants have it over, just about anybody with their starting 4 when you can run out, Bumgarner, Cueto, Samardzija, and Matt Moore now. I mean, the Dodgers have no starting pitching, and they pieced it together much like the Orioles all season, with a good bullpen and a lot of hitting. But it's going to be a detriment to them. Even the Cubs at this point, they have this big lead, but Arrieta is not as good as he was last year. Didn't have a good playoffs. Lester might be their best pitcher, Then Lackey just came back from an injury. Hendrickson has had a great year, but you match those guys up against even the Giants, and they're going to have a lot of trouble, winning a 4-game series, even a 3-game series. So I mean, that's where the Orioles are. Even if they survive winning the division or getting a wild card berth, they're just not going to have the depth in starting pitching to get through the first or second round of the playoffs.
I tell you, Barry, you've been running around to baseball stadiums watching baseball. I've been running to baseball stadium watching concerts, and I was out at Wrigley for Pearl Jam a couple weeks ago. I've never been anywhere where they're more convinced they're going to win the World Series for having never won. I mean, those Cubs fans, and I've said this, they better win Game 1. That's where everything turns for them.
Well, the Cubs are, if you look at it, they're built to win this year. Really, God bless them. I hope they do. I mean, I've seen the Rangers win the Stanley Cup. I've seen the Red Sox now win 3 World Championships. So the White Sox win. See the Giants win they had won 3 World Series.
Cleveland even had a parade, by the way. Cleveland had a parade.
Yeah, Cleveland. Okay, but not for the Indians. But but the point is that I'd love nothing more in my lifetime to see the Cubs win and get the whole thing out of the way. It just would be terrific. But I just think that they have once you get to the postseason, it's a completely different season. What you do over the whole course of 162 games, it's a marathon, and the playoffs are a sprint. And so many things that happen, each individual round is contained. The matchup against the team you play in that individual round has so much to do with what your success is going to be. And when you line up a team like the Cubs against the Giants, who have a core of players who've been there before and won, with the only guys on the Cubs that have won are basically they have Lester, who won in Boston, Lackey, who won in Boston, their second baseman, who won in Kansas City last year. But they don't have as a unit a team that has learned together how to win. And last year, when push came to shove, they wound up beating the Cardinals, which was winning their World Series for them, and then they folded against the Mets. So, I mean, their track record right now is not good. So if I'm a Cub fan, don't delude yourself, because once you get into the postseason, no matter what you do in that 162-game season, it's not going to matter. Plus, recent history shows that the teams that have had to battle it out to the last day of the season to win are much sharper than the teams that go into the playoffs, being able to set up their playoff rotation and having won by 14 games, and the season is over in mid-September. It doesn't work. It used to be, before this wild card setup, I would say if you look at 1969 to 1994, the best team in each league usually emerged. Every once in a while, you get an outlier like the '69 Mets, who nobody figured to first of all beat the Braves in the NLCS, let alone beat a powerful Oriole team that should have manhandled them in that World Series. They were so much better personnel-wise. But, otherwise, if you look at every year, it was pretty much that way. Since the wild card era, and especially with the 2 wild cards, it's the team that has to battle the hardest to get to the end that usually wins it all, reflecting on the Giants of 2 years ago, who lost the division, had to scrap for the wild card the few days of the season, threw Bumgarner against Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. They killed them, and they went on to win the whole thing on the last pitch of the season when Salvador Perez fouled to, Pablo with the winning run on third base. So, I mean, it's as hard as you play and as sharp as you are, the more it is. So I have my problems with what I think is going to be the long term for the Cubs this year.
Well, somebody in the American League East is going to have to battle tooth and nail the rest of the way, and there will be some emerging team. We'll be watching, man. It's great having you on, Barry. As always, love talking baseball with you and debating. And, hey, whenever Angelos or one of his heirs screams, I need a new stadium somewhere out in the suburbs, build me one, I'm going to say it was your idea.
Okay, that's fine.
Barry, great having you on, man. Be well.
All right, see you next.
He is Barry Bloom of MLB.com. Boomski, Boomskie, out on Twitter. There's a lovely picture of him with our mutual dear friend Tony Gwynn out on Twitter as well. And he's traveling East Coast and West Coast, rocking out with Springsteen in Boston on Wednesday night, or Foxborough, I should say, and rocking out with the Yankees and the Red Sox all weekend long. Barry Bloom of MLB.com. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear everywhere you are. And on Thursdays, Dennis comes in and brings you the SSV on WNST and the drive home. And, of course, Coons Ford Security Boulevard sponsors our WNST tech service, bringing you breaking news, any roster moves, any of that good stuff. It is our best service. Plus, you also have the morning newspaper. 7 a.m. It is delivered to your email inbox, digitally, of course, and powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month. We got Eric Weddle of the Ravens swabbing with us for the Bone Marrow Registry next Tuesday night out at Adams Jeep in Aberdeen. Full details up at WNST.net as well as in our social media. All for There Goes My Hero and for the Bone Marrow Registry. Big tip of the cap to the folks up at Adams Jeep and Steve and all their the folks that have been so supportive of us. Carl Delmont, all of our sponsors, Billy Ehrman at Continental Title for sponsoring all of our swabbing events. Next week with Eric Weddle. We're looking forward to that. We are at WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.